We're going to jump into Down to Earth now to go live to Johannesburg in South Africa, where the open plenary session is just getting underway from the BRICS summit. Let's listen to South African President Cyril Ramaphosa.
Decades, the bloc has been a major driver of global growth, of global trade and investment as well. BRICS stands for solidarity and for progress. BRICS stands for inclusivity and for a more equitable order. BRICS also stands for sustainable development. We are an inclusive formation of developing and emerging economies that are seeking to work together to benefit from our rich histories, our rich cultures, and systems to advance the prosperity of the peoples of our countries. We do so because we know that poverty, inequality, and underdevelopment are the biggest challenges facing humanity. We are therefore determined that the BRICS partnership, which has been growing in importance and influence over the years, must be harnessed to drive an inclusive global economic recovery. Advancing the African agenda for us is a strategic priority as South Africa during its chairship of BRICS. It is for this reason that we have chosen as the theme for this year's summit, BRICS and Africa, a partnership for mutually accelerated growth, sustainability, and inclusive multilateralism. We welcome the ongoing engagement of BRICS countries with Africa in the spirit of partnership and mutual respect. We are pleased that all BRICS members, Brazil is re-engaging with the African continent in a meaningful way. Russia has always had really good and meaningful relations with African countries. China has chosen to assist and support Africa with its aspirations for development. And all of us, in the ways that we are involved and engaged, we want to be engaged with Africa. India continues to increase its engagement and its trade with Africa. So as the BRICS family, all of us as members, we are deeply invested and deeply engaged with Africa. Our objectives are reciprocal trade and investment. We want the goods and products and services from Africa to compete on an equal footing on the global economy. The African Continental Free Trade Area, once fully operational, will unlock the benefits of the continental market and generate mutually beneficial opportunities for both African and BRICS countries. As nations of the world confront the effects of climate change, we must ensure that the transition to a low-carbon, climate-resilient future is just, it must be fair, and it must be able to take into account the different circumstances that prevail in all countries. In line with this objective, BRICS nations need to advance the interests of the Global South and call for industrialized countries to honor their commitments to support climate actions by developing economic progress. the commitments of support that have been made that have not yet been lived up to need to be followed through. Peace and stability are preconditions for a better, more equitable world. We are deeply concerned about conflicts across the world that continue to cause a great deal of suffering and hardship to many people around the world. As South Africa, our position remains that diplomacy, dialogue, negotiation, and adherence to the principles of the United Nations Charter are necessary for the peaceful and just resolution of conflicts. We are concerned that global financial and payment systems are increasingly being used as instruments of geopolitical contestation. Global economic recovery relies on predictable global payment systems and the smooth operating of banking, supply chains, trade, tourism, as well as financial flows. We will continue discussions on practical measures to facilitate trade and investment flows through the increased use of local currencies. This is a matter we believe that further discussions need to take place, particularly amongst our finance ministers. The world is changing. New economic, political, social, and technological realities for greater cooperation between nations is essential. New realities call for a fundamental reform of the institutions of global governance so that they may be more representative and better able to respond to the challenges that confront humanity. While many believe that we should advance the interests of all people, we believe that, yes, as we advance them, the interests of the global South, that we as BRICS want to be ready to advance are essential, and in this regard we want to collaborate more, to cooperate more with all countries that aspire to create a more inclusive international order. We are confident that this 15th BRICS Summit will advance the cause of common prosperity and progress. We are confident that this 15th BRICS Summit will in the end enrich and inspire our work towards the achievement of a much more humane global community. This is what BRICS is all about. This is what BRICS is committed to achieving. It is a great honor for us as South Africa to have this opportunity to host this 15th BRICS Summit and to have in our presence the BRICS members as they are represented here. And with those words, I open this session and then call upon one of the young leaders of our country who is also going to have an opportunity to give the words of welcome, but also to give the hope that young people in the BRICS countries hope to communicate to all of us. I call upon Ms. Asanda Luwaqa to speak to us. She is the chairperson of the Board of Directors of the National Youth Development Agency that seeks to advance the interests of young people in South Africa. Ms. Ayanda.
Thank you very much, Honorable President. Your Excellencies the heads of states of the BRICS countries, ministers and deputy ministers present, members of the media, leaders of business, civil society and labor, young people. It gives me great pleasure to deliver a statement on behalf of young people to the BRICS Heads of State Summit. Young people make up a large proportion of the populations of each of our respective countries. Their voices and views are critical as we forge a post-pandemic society at the highest decision-making forums. I must recognize the efforts of the organizers in ensuring that young people are represented at this particular summit. Your Excellencies, from the 18th till the 20th of July, young people from BRICS countries converged in Durban, KwaZulu-Natal for the 9th BRICS Youth Summit and the first in person since the pandemic. The summit was convened under the theme BRICS and Africa, Partnership for Mutually Accelerated Growth, Sustainable Development, and Inclusive Multilateralism, to discuss the current state and future prospects for the development of youth cooperation in BRICS countries over a wide range of areas. As we have entered into the decade of action of the Sustainable Development Goals, we believe that BRICS countries in general, and young people in particular, should use their collective strengths to prioritize the development paradigm, using it as a guiding principle for our work as we continue intra-BRICS cooperation across areas such as trade, education, skills development and training, economic participation and transformation, health and well-being, and social cohesion. Your Excellencies, young people in their collective believe that youth are the present and the future, and our interactions as BRICS member states cannot and should not be limited to an annual summit. Which is why at our 9th Youth Summit, we presented the draft framework for the establishment of a BRICS Youth Council, which will become the coordinating body for youth development between BRICS member countries and will join formations such as the BRICS Business Council, BRICS Women's Alliance, and the New Development Bank. More importantly, the Youth Council will be a historic achievement for young people across our BRICS member states. Since the summit, leaders of youth agencies have met on 3 occasions to consider the draft declaration and framework of the BRICS Youth Council, and we are pleased to inform this summit that we have reached consensus on the establishment of a Youth Council. This will allow us to ensure deeper and stronger collaboration amongst young people. We thus implore that this summit endorse our proposal for the establishment of the BRICS Youth Council in its final declaration, in ensuring that new pathways for positive change and innovation can be realized, and in doing so, will further ensure that no young person amongst the BRICS member states gets left behind. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Ayanda Luaka, for bringing the youth voice in the BRICS Summit. Your proposals, indeed, are very clear and comprehensive, and we will be responding to that. It now gives me pleasure to ask His Excellency, President Lula da Silva, President of the Federative Republic of Brazil, to take the floor.
My dear President of the Republic of South Africa, President Ramaphosa, my dear President Vladimir Putin, President of the Russian Federation, here represented by Foreign Affairs Minister Lavrov, my dear Prime Minister Modi of India, my dear Xi Jinping, President of the People's Republic of China, and my dear sister Dilma Rousseff, the CEO of the New Development Bank, state ministers of Brazil that are in my delegation, Mauro Vieira of Foreign Affairs, Fernando Haddad, Finance Minister of Brazil, Aniele Franco for Racial Equality, Ambassador Celso Amorim, Special International Advisor of the President, and my dear wife, Janja. Ladies and gentlemen, members of the Business Forum of the BRICS, ladies and gentlemen, members of the Women's Entrepreneurial Alliance, and Madam Limbo Zulu, representative of the Business Alliance of Women of BRICS, and the youth member, Asanda Luaka. Dear friends, it's with great joy to come back to Johannesburg, the city that was a very important stage of struggle against apartheid and that continues to inspire us to fight all forms of discrimination and inequality. The last time that I participated in the summit meeting, 2010, I had the honor to host in Brasilia, our capital, the heads of state and government of Russia, India, and China, besides South Africa, that participated as a candidate to become member of the BRICS. Only 1 year after that meeting, we confirmed that South Africa would join the BRICS in the first expansion of our grouping. Its inclusion made that we could better reflect the new confederation of the world power. We left that meeting strengthened. Today we represent 41% of the world population, and we are responsible for 31% of the global GDP in terms of purchasing power parity. But we face a more complex scenario than when we met for the very first time. In few years, we went back from a benign multipolarity juncture to going back to an absolute mindset of Cold War and geopolitical competition. This is lack of the senses that generates great uncertainty and corrodes multilateralism. We know very well where this path could take us. The world needs to understand the risks that are involved and which are unacceptable for humanity. The BRICS, we should say that all suffer the consequences of the war. The most vulnerable population in the developing countries are the ones that are hit more in an unproportional way. The Ukraine war shows the limitations of the UN Security Council. Many other conflicts and crises do not have the same attention, and the BRICS is a forum to discuss the main issues that affect peace and world security. We cannot bypass the treat. The main conflict of today that is happening in Ukraine that has global effects. Brazil has an historical position in the defense of the sovereignty and integrity of the territory and of all the principles that are followed by the UN. We believe that it is positive that a growing number of countries, amongst them the BRICS countries, also are engaged in direct contact with Moscow and with Kiev. We do not underestimate the difficulties to reach peace, and either we can be indifferent to the deaths and the destruction that increase every day. Brazil does not contemplate unilateral formulas for peace. We are ready to join efforts that we can effectively contribute for immediate ceasefire and a fair and everlasting peace. Everybody suffers with the consequences of the war. The most vulnerable population in the developing countries are the ones that are reached in an unproportional way. The Ukraine war shows the limitations of the UN Security Council. Many other conflicts and crises do not receive the due attention, even causing vast suffering for their peoples. Haitians, Yemenites, Syrians, Libyans, and Sudanese, and Palestinians all deserve to live in peace. It is unacceptable that global military spending in 1 year goes beyond $2 trillion, while the FAO says to us that 735 million people are in hunger every day in the world. The quest for peace is a collective obligation and an imperative for a fair development and sustainable development. The BRICS should act as a force for understanding and for cooperation. Our willingness is expressed in the contributions given by China, South Africa, and from my own country in all the endeavors to conflict resolution in Ukraine. There are many places while men go to war, the women are the ones that fight for conciliation. The valuation and the strengthening of the role of women in the resolution of conflicts will be more and more central for peace in the world. And more than that, the women's empowerment is a precondition for a full socioeconomic development. And paraphrasing Thomas Sankara, a great Pan-African leader, which says, we cannot hope for a society where half of the population is silenced by male chauvinism and by discrimination in political participation and in the world of labor. Dear friends, the weakening of the global governance is also clear in the development agendas, in financing, and in the confrontation with climate change. When I came back to the presidency in Brazil, I was very sad to see that the implementation of the 2030 agenda is under risk in all the world. A recent report from the UN indicates that we're in a strong backwardness. We see the greatest increase of inequality between the countries in more than the last 3 decades. In 30% of the goals, we stagnated or we're going backwards. It's very difficult to fight climate change while many developing countries still have to deal with hunger, poverty, and other kinds of violence. The principle of common and shared responsibility but differentiated is something that is true till today. The major response for the carbon emissions that cause the climate change were those countries that made their industrial revolution and feeded predatory colonial extractivism. They have an historical debt with the planet Earth and with humanity. We need to value the Paris Agreement and the Climate Convention instead of outsourcing climate responsibilities for the global South. Brazil is recovering its protagonism on the environmental agenda. The coordination with other developing countries that carry tropical forests to act as the climate change copes and biodiversity copes will be vital to give way to our interests. In the summit meeting in the Amazon rainforest that was held some days ago was a landmark for the necessary construction of a sustainable development model with more fairness. Our resources should not be exploited for the benefit of few, but valued and placed to service all, and above all, for the well-being of the local populations. And more than that, so that the promises that were already done by the rich countries should be fulfilled, climate financing and biodiversity should be truly new and additional in relationship to the traditional financing to development. We need an international financial system that, instead of feeding the inequalities, should help the medium and low-income countries to implement structural changes. This will only happen with an adequate representation of the Bretton Woods institutions and their climatic funds. Foreign indebtedness refrains sustainable development. It's inadmissible that the developing countries should be penalized with interest rates that are 8 times higher than the ones that are charged in the rich countries. It is necessary to increase liquidity, to enhance concessional financing, and last but not the least, the conditionalities. The trade multilateral system should be reactivated so it can come back and act as a tool for fair trade, predictable, equitable, and non-discriminatory. No one anymore remembers the development round of the WTO. The decarbonization of our economies should be followed by the job creation with dignity, industrialization and green infrastructure and public services for all. Through the new development bank, we can offer our own alternatives for adequate financing that will attend or meet the needs of the global South. I'm sure that under the leadership of my sister Dilma Rousseff, the bank will manage to face these challenges. The creation of a common valued unit for our trade transactions and investments for the BRICS countries will increase our payment options and reduce our vulnerabilities. Presidents, today, and guests, today the BRICS are fully consolidated as a brand and as a political asset of strategic value. The participation of dozens of heads of government and state tomorrow in the enhanced session will represent an historical landmark. The interest of many countries to join the BRICS is the recognition of its growing relevance. And also, we will have a troika at the G20 as members of the BRICS in the period 2023. And so it's another opportunity for us to make advancement of the concerns of the global South with the inequalities and with sustainable development. That the momentum that motivated the creation of BRICS 15 years ago continued to inspire us in building a multipolar, fair, and inclusive international order. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, President Lula da Silva, for taking us down memory lane, particularly in relation to the composition of the BRICS family. You relate to us how, for instance, South Africa attended as a candidate member and thereafter was added to BRICS as a member, and that in itself strengthened the BRICS family. We once again stand at another momentous moment when more than 20 other countries are seeking to be part of the BRICS family. And I know that as BRICS leaders, you are discussing this matter and giving close attention to it, and you will need to make your decisions known. Your commitment to contribute to achieving a peaceful world, something that is appreciated, and your other views that you expressed are also most appreciated. The empowerment of women is something that has a great deal of resonance with most of us here, as are your views on climate change and how the resources of various countries should be used for the benefit of all. So thank you very much for your remarks in that regard. It is now my pleasure to ask President Vladimir Putin to have his moment to speak. He'll be participating through the virtual platform.
Thanks a lot. President Ramaphosa, distinguished President Lula, distinguished Prime Minister Modi, President Xi, dear colleagues, at the outset, I would like to thank South African friends for what they have done during their presidency, during their chairmanship this year. The colleagues before me have already given positive assessment of the BRICS activities. And in general, certainly we share these assessments. Our group of 5 countries has rightly proved to be a credible entity on the global arena, with ever-growing influence in global affairs. The strategic course of BRICS is aimed at the future, and it meets the aspirations of the main part of the international community, the so-called global majority. By acting in concert on the principles of equality, partnership, support, and account for each other's interests, we deal with the most pressing issues of global and regional agenda. The main important thing is that BRICS stands for a multipolar world order that is equitable and built on international law and the principles of the United Nations Charter, including respect for the right of every people to its own development path. Some countries promote their hegemony, exceptionality, and their policy of the ongoing colonialism and neocolonialism. I would like to note that the aspiration to preserve their hegemony in the world led to a dire crisis in Ukraine. At first, with the help of Western countries, an anti-constitutional coup d'etat was carried out in this country. After that, those people who did not agree with this coup faced a war. A war was unleashed against them, a war of attrition, and it lasted for 8 years. Russia decided to support people that fight for their culture, for their traditions, for their language and their future. Our actions in Ukraine are guided by only one thing: to put an end to the war that was unleashed by the West against people in Donbass. We thank our colleagues within BRICS that take an active part in the attempts to put an end to this situation and to ensure just settlement by peaceful means. Dear colleagues, the main thing is that we unanimously stand for the shaping of the multipolar world order, which is genuinely equitable and which is building on international law. The BRICS countries are building up their potential. As was said, the BRICS countries are home to over 3 billion persons, and their share in global GDP as per purchasing power parity of the so-called G7. Over the past decades, BRICS investment to global economy have doubled, and the cumulative export reached 20% of the overall indicator. We are successfully implementing the strategy for BRICS Economic Partnership 2025. Namely, we are strengthening the bilateral cooperation on such areas as diversification of supply chains, de-dollarization and transfer to local currencies in our mutual settlements, digital economy, support for small and medium enterprises, just transfer of technologies. And naturally, the active part in these processes is played by business community. A great deal of effort is invested within the BRICS Business Council and the BRICS Women's Business Alliance that the host of our meeting, President Ramaphosa, indicated. The leaders of these organizations are present at this meeting. An important priority for the BRICS interaction is the establishment of new, sustainable, safe transport routes. In my address to the BRICS Business Forum, I talked about the importance of a speedy development of transcontinental routes, such as the North-South corridor, that would link Russian Northern Sea and Baltic ports to sea terminals in the Gulf and in the Indian Ocean. In the future, it would ensure the annual transit of up to 30 million tons of cargo. We believe that it is high time to establish a BRICS Permanent Commission on Transport that would deal not only with the North-South project, but in broader terms, it would deal with logistics and transport corridors development, both interregional and global ones. Should the partners agree to that, the Russian side could work on this idea within its chairmanship in 2024. And certainly, we welcome strengthened interaction within BRICS in terms of global innovations. We look forward to a more active cooperation within the BRICS Global Research Advanced Infrastructure Network. It could be supported and developed by the Special Trust Fund. For its part, Russia is ready to share its experience and best practices, including when it comes to digital transformation and the use of artificial intelligence. We also seek to actively participate in the implementation of the achieved arrangements on the establishment of the Joint Working Group on Nuclear Medicine. We seek to swiftly switch into practice the work of the BRICS TVET Cooperation Alliance. We wholeheartedly support the proposal of South African colleagues to organize a separate ministerial on women affairs. Their role in political, economic and social life of our states should definitely be enhanced. Dear colleagues, next year, Russia will assume BRICS chairmanship. Our chairmanship will have the following motto: strengthening multilateralism for just global development and security. We plan to have some 200 political, economic and public events that will be hosted by over a dozen Russian cities. At the same time, the BRICS summit is scheduled for October 2024. It will take place in the city of Kazan. The specific dates will be agreed upon with colleagues via diplomatic channels. We'll also have events in the format that has proved its relevance. I'm talking about BRICS Plus and BRICS Outreach. During our chairmanship, we would like to do our utmost to efficiently facilitate the implementation of decisions adopted at this summit, including with regard to the expansion of BRICS. We will coordinate closely with partners on foreign policy matters. We will jointly work on key international platforms, primarily within the United Nations. We will continue regular meetings of BRICS national security advisors. Certainly, we will prioritize such urgent tasks as combating terrorism and the spread of terrorist ideology, as well as combating money laundering and return of assets gained by criminal means. By the way, we thank partners for their support within the Financial Action Task Force. We hope that we will keep such spirit of solidarity in the future. We will contribute to comprehensive implementation of the Strategy for BRICS Economic Partnership 2025 and the development of new long-term guidelines for cooperation. This includes, in our view, increasing the role of states in international monetary and financial system, the development of interbank cooperation, expanding the use of local currencies and deepening interaction between tax, customs and anti-monopoly agencies. Naturally, Russian priorities include bolstered partnership in science and innovation, healthcare, education, the development of humanitarian ties in general. Cultural and civilizational diversity is one of the pillars of the new multipolar world order, and it means the establishment of integral free space for cultural exchange, art and creativity. As we see it, it's high time for partners within BRICS, as well as the SCO and the Community of Independent States and other countries, to have a serious conversation on the future of culture in the world, on preserving and multiplying global cultural heritage, By the way, such dialogue could be held within the 9th International Cultural Forum, which is scheduled to take place in the city of St. Petersburg from November 16th to 18th. And certainly, Russia will continue to contribute to contacts in sports and youth exchanges. Namely, in June 2024, we plan to have the BRICS Games. We would be happy to welcome teams from the BRICS nations at the next year's international competition, the Games of the Future. They will take place in the city of Kazan. This is a mix of dynamic sports and popular video games and technological devices. A good opportunity for contacts and friendly talks will be given by the World Youth Festival that will take place in March next year in the city of Sochi. In conclusion, let me once again highlight that Russia, during its chairmanship, will interact in the most constructive way with BRICS partners in order to further enhance the role and credibility of BRICS. Without any doubt, this credibility will only grow. Thank you for your attention.